A time for celebration after his biggest victory yet. Khalifa Haftar has been pushing for the title of Libya's strongman till now.
وتعلن انتصار جيشك الوطني في معركة الكرامة ضد الإرهاب. نصرا مؤزرا من عند الله عز وجل. لتدخل بنغازي ابتداء من اليوم عهدا جديدا من الأمن والسلام.
That's how Haftar has consistently sold himself to the rest of the world as a bulwark against what he says are radical Islamic militants. It was a coalition of such groups called the Benghazi Defense Brigades, with links to Daesh and Al-Qaeda, that had been in control of the city for 3 years. Haftar's Libyan National Army, or LNA, finally managed to push them out of the city this week. That's happened a few weeks after the self-styled Field Marshal and his main rival, the UN-recognized GNA based in Tripoli, met for preliminary peace talks in Abu Dhabi.
Honestly, I consider it a step in the right direction, given that Libya has reached a dead end in the dialogue and the crisis has deepened. I believe that this step from the General Khalifa Haftar is a step in the right direction, and hopefully he will stick to certain national demands that all Libyans will agree on.
Primary among those concerns is the end of fighting around facilities and ports in the southwest. Those ports are crucial for Libya's oil-based economy, and that's where Haftar has made the biggest impact. It didn't look so good at the start of the year for the Field Marshal's LNA, after it lost control of the main oil facilities to the Benghazi brigades in March. But since then, Haftar has made a sweeping comeback, retaking control of the Libyan oil crescent and capturing Benghazi and effectively demolishing the brigades as a major power. That means he now controls more territory in the country than all other groups combined, and the morale among his forces is sky high.
We attacked around half an hour ago. We have many fallen and wounded soldiers. We are the special forces, and we've known exactly when terrorism began. It wasn't recently, it was since 1989. Daesh knows us well, terrorists know us well, and we continue to bear the responsibility because of these martyrs. May God rest their souls in peace.
The UN-backed GNA in Tripoli may still claim to enjoy international legitimacy, but is it Haftar who holds the keys to the solution of the Libyan conflict? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Mohammed Al-Jahr in Brussels. He's the founder and director of the Libya Outlook Research and Consultancy Group. From San Antonio, Mansour Al-Khikhia, he's the chairman of the Political Science Department at the University of Texas. And from Cambridge in England, Rhiannon Smith. She's the managing director of a news portal called Eye on ISIS in Libya. Thanks all of you for joining us. Mansour, let's begin with you. The last time I spoke with you, you told me you didn't like Khalifa Haftar. But don't you have to give credit where it's due now? He smashed the extremists in Benghazi and liberated the city. Isn't that a good thing?
No, I didn't tell you. Last time I didn't tell you I didn't like Khalifa Haftar, and that to be very clear. I appreciate what he has done. Believe me, I do. After seeing what ISIS did in Benghazi, I appreciate that. But I have a fear. My fear is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what I'm seeing lately coming up from his spokesperson is that we give you 5 months or 6 months to get things straight, and if you don't, we will come in. And this doesn't make any sense to me, because we're still in a war. I mean, ISIS might physically have gone out of Libya, but really it's still there. The culture is still there. The big problem for me is what ISIS has left in Libya. And this is what we have to be aware of. Haftar is wrong to be saying, you have 6 months, but if you don't take care of things, I will come in and take care of things for you. I appreciate what he has done, but I did not authorize him to replace one military regime with another.
Yeah, okay, good point. Mohammed?
This is where
so let's ask Mohammed. Yeah, so Haftar might have done a good thing by destroying ISIS, but Libyans have to be careful because this guy seems to be having the markings of a potential dictator. You would agree with that, right?
The point that needs to be made here is the fact that Khalifa Haftar enjoys a lot of popular support for what he has done. He enjoys tribal support in eastern Libya, popular support in eastern Libya, and there are more tribes, more cities and towns warming up to the idea of the military coming in to help alleviate the miserable conditions that some of the local communities across Libya are going through. And that is what needs to be focused on, to be honest. There are obviously fears by critics of Haftar, by opponents of Haftar, that he is trying to establish a new dictatorship in Libya. But the worrying part for me is that he is possibly going to establish or try to establish a dictatorship in Libya or an authoritarian regime, but with the support of the population, or at least with the support of the majority of the population. And the reason that he enjoys so much support is because of two things. First, the failure of the international community to have a post-intervention strategy after the 2011 ouster of the Gaddafi regime, but also the failure of Libyan political groups and Libyan political leaders to have an order that can actually respond to the aspirations and to the needs of people. And that is what makes Khalifa Haftar, for many people in Libya, many tribes, towns and cities, as the only viable option on the ground that can actually deliver at least on their most basic needs of stability and security.
That's interesting.
And that's very important to keep in mind.
Okay, so we're keeping it in mind. Rhiannon, does that ring true that the people might want an authoritarian leader such as Haftar? My question to you, Rhiannon, is how is this any different to the rise of Muamar Gadhafi when he enjoyed so much support amongst the Libyans?
Well, yes, I think that is a good point. So, I mean, Mohammed is right that Haftar does have, increasing amounts of support in the east and in Benghazi, particularly, he has been able to reintroduce a certain amount of security and stability. But I think, first of all, it's important to note that that support is still mainly centred in the east of Libya and not in the west or in the south. The other point, as you mentioned, this kind of authoritarianism, I think there is a danger that there becomes a kind of nostalgia for the kind of, strong man who can defeat terrorist groups, jihadis, and can bring some sense of security back. However, I don't think that that is going to work. So I think we have to remember that with the threats they've been facing from terrorism, from jihadi groups, these are only a symptom of Libya's problems. They are not the cause. And actually the cause is generally instability, but also a lack of governance and a lack of political unity. And I think these are more important. And actually, if you have Haftar coming in as a dictator or a authoritarian, then these problems will just continue and will be propagated, as we saw under Gaddafi, and will not actually get to the root of, the main reasons, the goals, the aspirations which Libyans took to the streets to revolt against in 2011.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, Gaddafi was killed by his own people in the most horrific of ways in a revolution. Mansour, let me ask you, the French foreign minister, the new French foreign minister, basically said Libya is a failed state and that there has to be political space for someone like Haftar. Clearly, the Tripoli-based government, the UN-backed government, would be freaking out at that statement because it delegitimizes them in some way. Do you believe that the French foreign minister is right, that there has to be space for Haftar?
Yes, of course, I do believe. And I think the Tripoli government is illegitimate in the first place. I think that our biggest problem in Libya is too much UN interference and forcing upon Libyans a legitimate government. But just to carry on, I think, with the issue of Haftar, Haftar knows better. He knows better. He has lived in exile. And whatever you want to say, he's part of the Gaddafi regime. Many were part of the Gaddafi regime. But Haftar lived in exile for close to 20 years outside, and he knows better. He knows what a democratic system is like, and he knows what he has to do. I mean, ultimately, I'm not saying there should not be a state of emergency in the country to deal with so many of these issues. But there needs to be a state of emergency under rule of law, under control, under a democratic structure. And it seems to me that if you eliminate the remaining democratic structure within the country and you put in the army, then you have a military regime. And I agree with the Cambridge, with the specialists in the Cambridge. I mean, the problem is really very deep in Libya. The problem is not in our stars, but as the Bard said, in ourselves. And you know, please, just give me 1 second. When God asked Muhammad to carry the message, He didn't select him because of his beauty, because of his wealth, because of his prowess, because of his machismo. He told him, which means that we selected you because you have manners. What has happened in Libya today is way beyond Haftar. The problem is they've lost manners. 50 years of anarchy, 50 years of nonsense has not left the country. And Haftar cannot deal with that, not within the military regime either. Right. And so this is what he has to do. He knows better. He knows exactly what he has to do, and yet he doesn't want to do it. This is why I'm saying the French Prime Minister is quite right.
So hold on, Mansour.
That Haftar has to play a role in this.
So hold on, Mansour. Yes. When you say he knows better,
go ahead, please.
What I'm presuming is that you're saying the man, now that he's got the east of the country, he's got Benghazi, he's got the east of the country, eventually he's going to go and march on Tripoli, and it's going to be very ugly, and you're going to have east versus west. Is that what you're saying he's going to do?
Yes.
And he should know better because that will plunge the country into further civil war?
Well, he is going to go west. There's no doubt about that. He's just waiting for the opportunity to go west. The problem, he might not have lots of support in the west, but the issue is that the west is so anarchic, and we have run by militias. The east there's a lot of sense of stability in the east, and thanks to Haftar for that. I mean, if Haftar had not intervened, rather the east would be under ISIS, and so for that we're thankful for him. But in the west, you still have rampant militias doing what they want to do. The government in the west is quite effete. It can't do much. It can't even control Tripoli right now. Right. I mean, there's an army surrounding Tripoli that wants to remove the... And so ultimately, he's going to go.
Okay.
I have no doubt
so then,
him going to go.
Okay, then let me ask Mohammed.
He needs to go. He needs to know better how to do it.
Okay, so how to do it.
Go ahead, please.
Mohammed, is it going to be a mistake for Haftar to take his army and head west and try and topple the government in Tripoli?
I don't think he will want to topple the government. He knows his lines, I believe, and he knows that there are red lines for the international community when it comes to Tripoli and also when it comes to the government there. I think in the past he tried to communicate to the international community that he wanted to control Tripoli and he wanted to enter Tripoli militarily, and the answer was negative from the international community that they will not allow that and that there will be consequences for that. However, I think Haftar will be heading west, not with weapons according to his spokesperson, but also according to him. He will be going on a charm offensive and a campaign of, if you like, of outreach to local communities that have been suffering of the militias that have been roaming free in the country. For example, I'll give you one example. In El-Garabulli, around 50 kilometers east of Tripoli, civilians were killed a few days ago, and there was intense fighting because of armed groups from Misrata and armed groups from the capital Tripoli that are loyal to the government of National Accord. And do you know what the mayor of the municipality or the city of El-Garabulli was actually calling for Khalifa Haftar to come and save them and save the people? So Khalifa Haftar will be able to enter the west of Libya by capitalizing on the failures in the west of Libya and on the insecurity in the west of Libya. So if anyone wants to prevent Khalifa Haftar from coming to the west, they need to provide an alternative. They need to show that there is an alternative that can actually work on the ground.
Okay.
Otherwise, he will definitely be in the west of Libya possibly fairly soon.
Sure. But what Mr. Sarraj and his government are saying, we have a government, give us a chance. Why are you already putting your support? I mean, they're thinking, why is the UAE, why is Egypt, why are these countries putting their support behind a strong man? Because he's not an Islamist, so he must be a good guy. But they're putting their support behind him instead of them, who are the UN-sanctioned government. You have to understand their perspective as well, right? They're not even being given the chance to govern.
Yes. Yeah, they have been given 2 years. Their mandate is almost over. So the mandate of the government of National Accord and Prime Minister Sarraj actually runs out on the 17th of December of this year. So they have had almost 2 years to try and get something done. Khalifa Haftar succeeded where others have failed. He managed to win the support of the local communities, and he managed to get the support of key regional players and also European countries, including France and other countries. So he managed to play his game domestically and also regionally and internationally right. He had a plan. He implemented that plan on the ground, and that is what has been lacking in Libya over the last 6 years. No one had a plan, and no one was willing to implement a plan on the ground. And Khalifa Haftar is the result of failure in Libya. Khalifa Haftar came as a result of failure of the international community and failure of successive Libyan governments and Libyan political groups to come up with a solution to the problems that the country has been facing for the last 6 years.
Understood.
So that is why Khalifa Haftar is getting stronger. That is why Khalifa Haftar has a reliability and credibility in the eyes of people and regional players and backers.
Okay, so Rhiannon, he's the result of failure, but is he the answer to the problems that have emerged due to that failure?
I do not believe so. I mean, I do agree, as I think both your other guests have said, that Khalifa Haftar does have to have a place, and I'm sure will have a place in the future of Libya. However, I do believe that in his role as a military commander, that needs to be under civilian control. Now, I think what has been mentioned about the GNA, yes, it's true, they have had, a year and a half, they haven't had many successes, there are many problems in Libya, even in Tripoli, they don't have full control of many areas, there's a problem with electricity, water, infrastructure, they haven't done a great job. However, I think it's important to remember also that although they have reached out to Haftar, he has been a major spoiler in efforts to try and unify and to amend the Libyan political agreement. And so far, that process is still stalled. And I think because Haftar has been gaining momentum in the east, and in large part due to the support mentioned there from the UAE and Egypt, among others, this has meant he hasn't actually needed to kind of come to the negotiating table because he's already getting outside backing. So I do believe, although the UN process is far from perfect, the GNA is far from perfect, in order to have a stable Libyan society, one that can move forward, create a constitution and move out of this transitional phase, and that does need to involve all the actors on the table, and that's very difficult to do when you have one faction who is backed militarily by some of the strong regional powers and who do appear to be pushing for a more kind of military victory in western and southern Libya as well as the east.
Right. Mansour, some of these key players on the outside have been involved in the GCC-Qatar spat. I wonder, how does that affect the situation on the ground in Libya, given that Qatar was accused of funding and supporting the extremist groups? You have the UAE and Egypt, for example, supporting Haftar. Is that adding to the complication and the mess?
I think it is. I think the big problem is so many countries with their own agendas are actually meddling in Libyan affairs, as though Libya doesn't have enough to deal with ISIS and extremist groups and illiteracy and thievery, and they have, and so I mean, it does. They do not perhaps directly impact, but indirectly they do impact what happens in Libya. And this is what I'm saying. I'm saying Haftar should in fact be smarter in how he deals with these issues. I mean, he has lived outside. He has experienced what the democratic system works like. He has experienced how the world works, and he should know what kind of system he needs to set up in Libya. Sarraj in Tripoli, we give him. You say, give the government in Tripoli a chance to operate. Well, the truth is, it cannot operate within a system of anarchy. Tripoli and the West is under a system of anarchy. It is controlled by militias. You still have remnants of ISIS over there. And they can't, even with the best government in the world, he can't do anything. And yet Sarraj still is clinging to it as though he's the savior of Libya. And he's not. He has no power. And in fact, the antagonism that he created with Haftar has in fact hurt Libya as a whole. This is why when I look at all of this, I see, and your guests from Europe, both you guys are quite right that the big problem in Libya is the absence of leadership, and Haftar has proven himself not to be a good leader, because a good leader should not only control power, but he knows how to use it.
Okay.
And he's not using it very well.
Okay. And just before
this is my major problem.
Okay. And just before we end the discussion, I want to talk about Daesh a little bit, because Haftar smashed them in Benghazi along with some other groups. But Rhiannon, you run the web portal Eye on ISIS in Libya. Presumably they're not just going to roll over and die now that they suffered a defeat in Benghazi. How prevalent are they still across the country, and how much of a danger are they and other extremist groups like them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point to make, that although ISIS, you know, they have lost most of their territory. Also, many of these other jihadi groups now have also. The first point is that there is a kind of mutability between these different jihadi groups. So just because someone used to fight for ISIS or the Benghazi Revolutionary Shura Council or others, it doesn't mean that they won't swap between them, and therefore there is a lot of exchanging between these groups. Therefore, the jihadist threat is not the ISIS threat alone. As you've mentioned, in Benghazi, they've been very weakened. They were already weak, to be honest, in Benghazi. But what we've seen in Sirte since the end of 2016, where the American Mazaratan campaign drove them out of the city, what we've begun to see in the last 2 months is, so some of these fighters did seep south of Sirte to the deserts south of Sirte, sort of north of Jufra. And we have seen in recent months there have been a rise in kind of hijacking of fuel tanks. There have been a few kind of minor scuffles and attacks in that area. So they are weakened, there's no doubt about that, and it's unlikely, I think, that they will be able to regain territory in the same way they had previously. But I think the important point, which is the one I made earlier, is that the ability of these jihadi groups, including ISIS, Ansar Sharia and others, to gain territory and to have the amount of control they've had in the last 3 years is due to the lack of governance and instability in many of these areas. And I think the danger is in somewhere like Sirte, which is effectively in a no man's land between the sort of eastern and Western factions, is that if that instability continues, if, for example, there's a new conflict in that area, there will be the opportunity for these groups to regain a bit of control and to be able to launch kind of guerrilla-style attacks. So I don't think we've seen the last of them, and I think the threat will continue to persist.
And just before we end, Mohammed, do you agree with that? These extremist groups are still around and they'll continue to operate within the anarchy?
As long as the environment that gave rise to them and the environment that was conducive to allow them to flourish is there, of course the threat of jihadism and extremist groups will always remain. But I also wanted to stress the point that the jihadist threat in Libya, or the extremist threat in Libya, is not just ISIS, but there are lots of other Al-Qaeda affiliated groups, Boko Haram individuals, some from the Sahel region, some groups operating in the Sahel region are also active in southern Libya, and these represent a major instability factor and a major threat for the future of Libya. But I think Khalifa Haftar is also capitalizing on this. His forces will be moving on Sirte, for example, to try and capture Sirte over the next few months. His commanders have made this clear, and I think his forces are mobilizing there, and he is portraying himself as the individual and the authority and the force that is capable of having a controlled environment that cannot give rise or cannot be conducive of extremist groups, and that with his security apparatus or with his security approach, he can actually win the battle against these groups. Whether he will be able to or not, that remains to be seen.
Okay, what a mess. We hope for all Libyans, they experience better times ahead, but it's been great to talk to all of you. Mohammed, Mansour and Rhiannon, thank you very much.
Thank you.